Welcome to the Forest Lake Association annual meeting. My name is Jerry Gruntner. I'm the president of the Lake Association. I want to thank all of you that are here tonight, our existing members, for your contributions and your support to the association. And I also know there are a number of guests here, people who are just coming to see what we're all about. So thank you for coming, and hopefully you'll consider joining the association here after you hear about what we're doing for the lake. Bathrooms are, I don't know where the bathrooms are. There's someplace out there by the cafeteria. So go out by the cafeteria. I'm sorry, I was going to look for them. I didn't find them. So they're out there someplace. I want to mention our board members. We have 10 board members for the association. And in your handout packet, you have a list of those 10 board members and their contact information. We're all wearing blue shirts with name tags on, so I would encourage you to stop by and say hi to one of us, introduce yourself. It's important that we get to know you as much as you get to know us. You know, the board spends countless hours doing things for the lake, and the association is not the board. The association is you as our members. So we're just, here to help you figure out what we need to do for this lake. So the more we can communicate with you as our members, the more we can do and better understand what you want from a lake standpoint. So stop by, see us. We'll be out there by the tables after the meeting again too. So please let us know. I want to recognize our corporate sponsors. We have 20 corporate sponsors this year, and these are local businesses in Forest Lake that decided that the lake is important, and they're financially supporting us. And you have in your handout a list of those corporate sponsors, along with, we have a board out there, and some of the sponsors are out there exhibiting. So please support them in the community here, because they're a valuable resource for us too as a lake association. One of the things that we try to do is communicate on a regular basis with you as members. And we do that by email. That is a continual challenge because of people changing their email addresses. Every time we send an email out, we get significant bounces or undeliverables. So what I'm going to ask you to do, if you have not received an email and you're a paid member of the Lake Association, and you have not received an email from us this year, and we've sent out 6 to 8 of them already this year, please stop by one of the tables on the way out there. We'll look up your email address to make sure that it's correct. If it is correct, then our emails are going into your spam folder. We know that's happening with some people. If it's going into your spam folder, you just have to pull in Forest Lake Association into your contacts, and then it'll go directly into your inbox. So we just ask you to try to help us manage your email addresses. If you're changing your email addresses, let us know, because we'll change it in our database too then. New this year, we're having an event, and you'll see it out there when you leave. We've usually had an annual barbecue. This year, we're having an annual rib fest. Vanelli's approached us about putting on a rib fest for the Lake Association. For those of you that know what it is, they'll be cooking ribs. There'll be 15 to 20 rib masters cooking ribs on June 22nd. At Vanelli's, and at 4 o'clock we'll be able to start serving ribs. And so we're selling tickets for this event. All the proceeds, every dollar of ticket that we sell goes back to Lake Association. So it's a tremendous fundraiser, plus it's a great time there enjoying other individuals and having fun eating ribs. So for a $12 ticket you get 4 ribs, and you get a beer and or a soda or a drink, whatever else you want. So please stop by the table out there on your way out. We have limited tickets. We'll also be selling these tickets at several businesses around town here, and we'll make those announcements too for you here as we get done with the annual meeting, but probably here in late April, early May, we'll tell you where else you can buy them. So June 22nd, put it on your calendars. We're going to be done with our presentations right around 8 o'clock tonight. And then we're going to try to have at least 20 minutes to a half hour of questions, and of course we'll be answering it. We've always found that to be a very, very well worth effort because we like to hear what you are concerned about from a lake standpoint. So we'll try to wrap up around 8, and we'll be definitely out of here by 8:30. So that's kind of the agenda for tonight. And with that, I'll start the first presentation. So what does our membership look like for the Lake Association? So there's 975 residents, plus or minus, on the lake. We have a database of 425 of those 975. As of yesterday, we have 327 individual paid members, which includes our 20 corporate members, or about 33% of the lake. In 2018, 35 new homeowners moved on to Forest Lake. We reached out to them, went and met with them. We had 5 of those 35 join the Lake Association. Not particularly stellar results, but I would say this year we've already exceeded the 5, and we're only in April this year of new homeowners that moved on to the lake, so we're very excited by that. Our goal for 2019 is to have 400 members. Our long-term goal is to be 50% of the 975 members of the Lake Association. Many of the lakes around Forest Lake that have lake associations are between 40 and 50% of the lakeshore homeowners that are part of the association. That's our goal. That's what we want to work towards. And, we need your help to do that. And we'll continue to work hard at that. But it's always hard to get people to join. We got a lot of people joining tonight, so that's very encouraging, and we'll keep working on it. People ask the question, what do I get for my $50 that I contribute to the Lake Association? In 2018, we spent $19,800 on the lake. We did a number of dollars relative to AIS, as you can see. One of the things we heard from some members was that the buoys between first and second and third were not lighted. So we spent some money and lighted the buoys between first and second and third. We also heard that people were always complaining that there was not enough dock space at Lakeside Park. When you went over there in your pontoon or your boat, there was never any place to dock. We added public dock there at Lakeside, and that was widely received, and it's helped out a lot with the congestion over there. We also spent almost $3,000 on operating costs of the weed harvester. I'll talk about the weed harvester here a little bit later on in my presentation. And then we had annual operating costs and other things that are just part of running the association. So what are we going to do in 2019 with our revenues? Unfortunately, a number of the lights that were on the buoys between first and third got busted up. So we're looking at more robust lighted buoys. And I'm not sure we'll come to a decision on that, but we're going to look into it. We also heard back and some people saying, we still could use a little more dock at Lakeside Park, so we might consider doing that. We also are investigating a loon habitat program. We've reached out to Eagle Scouts. Either we might get involved with them or we might take it on ourselves, but we want to increase the loon population on Forest Lake, and there's ways of doing that. There's some cost involved in it, but we think it would be a great spend of the monies. Starry stonewort is one of the new AISs that's starting to invade Minnesota. And one of the things we're going to consider doing is developing a starry stonewort rapid response plan that if it comes into Forest Lake, we have a plan to how to control or even potentially eradicate starry stonewort. And you'll hear more about that later in the meeting. Additional weed harvester time. I'll talk about that again here further, but we may have to spend more money on the weed harvester. Some enhanced recruitment of members, obviously, but more importantly, we want suggestions from you as the Lake Association members. If you think there are things we should be doing for the lake, please send us an email. Call me. Call any of the other board members. Let us know what you're thinking. We try to do what's right, but until we hear back from you, it's always hard to know what we should be doing. So please consider that. So what's the direction of AIS for the Lake Association? So what's happening is there's decreased local funding, both from a county standpoint, state standpoint, and even from a local standpoint. In 2019, the Lake Association is going to be responsible for treating Irrigation Watermilfoil in Forest Lake, just like we did last year. We received a grant, $8,000 grant from Washington County for this. However, The cost of this application and the herbicide treatment is between $20,000 and $25,000. Fortunately, the City of Forest Lake is going to help with the expenditures to between the $8,000 grant and the total cost of Irrigation Watermilfoil treatment. Starry stonewort. This is, for me personally, one of our biggest next threats in Forest Lake is starry stonewort. You'll hear later on where last year in 2018, 53 boats came into Forest Lake that came from infested lakes with starry stonewort. I don't need to say anything more than that, 53. The other thing is that the Comfort Lake Forest Lake Watershed District is responsible for all other AIS. They're responsible for curly pondweed, flowering rush, and zebra mussels. They do a great job with managing the other AIS besides Irrigation Watermilfoil, so I appreciate everything that they're doing too for the lake. Weed harvester. So last summer we had a lot of calls from people regarding the weed harvester and complaints about things and so forth. So I thought it would be important to explain to you what the deal is with the weed harvester. The weed harvester, we're in a partnership with the City of Forest Lake on this. The city is responsible for maintaining the weed harvester, putting it in the lake, taking it out of the lake, and for hauling the weeds to the compost. We, as the Lake Association, are responsible for paying the operator to run the weed harvester. That's where we spent the $3,000 last year. They spent 224 hours on the lake last year cutting native vegetation. Now, we can only operate this weed harvester in DNR permitted areas. We have to submit a permit and get approval from DNR as to where we're going to use that weed harvester. We cannot use it in any areas where AIS is located. We also cannot come into dock areas and cut weeds in front of native vegetation in front of people's docks. Steve Schmalz is going to tell you a little bit tonight about what you can do as a homeowner relative to native vegetation around your dock areas. But that's not what we can do with the weed harvester. Last year, 36 loads came out of the lake. 3,400 tons of weeds were removed. Here's the dilemma. Zebra mussels are continuing to filter the water in Forest Lake, and the water clarity is getting better. Those of you that have been on the lake last year saw the water clarity improve. The water clarity will continue to improve. And what's happening is this. The native vegetation down there is saying, oh my goodness, sunshine. And all it wants to grow up to the surface. So it's more likely than not that native vegetation will continue to expand in 2019 and beyond. It's a phenomenon that we're having because of water clarity. So we're going to continue to work with the weed harvester, but hopefully you can work with us and understand that we can't do everything that everybody wants us to do with this weed harvester. What is the health of Forest Lake? So Forest Lake is rated as a C+ lake. Well, that's not really good, but it's not all horrible either. However, it's getting better. You know, the Watershed District is doing a number of capital improvement projects to improve the water quality of Forest Lake. The Lake Association is doing things. It's going to improve, but it's going to take 5-10 years, if not longer, to improve it. We have several species of AIS, but we don't have it all yet. We don't have starry stonewort, and we don't have spiny water fleas. Those two are predominant in many, many lakes also in Minnesota. Continued heavier boat traffic. Those of you that are out on the lake on weekends, you know how much traffic is out there on weekends. Forest Lake is a huge recreational lake. It's going to continue to be a heavy recreational lake. Fisheries are very good. We know that from the DNR. We have a very good database of concerned lakeshore owners. That's you folks, you know. You have a concern about what's going on with this lake. That's why you're here. That's why you want to know what's going on. So that's healthy for any kind of lake. The Watershed District, as I said, does a great job with capital improvement projects on removing phosphorus before it comes into the lake, and you'll hear more about that here shortly, but appreciate everything they're doing there. There's also continued pressure from growth in the area. You just have to look around. How much more building is going on in Forest Lake? A significant part of the watershed around this area drains into Forest Lake, and that's just the way it is. You see a lot of small cabins that are being torn down and large structures are being built in its place. All of that has impacts upon the health of the lake. But overall, Forest Lake is a great lake. You know, it's a wonderful lake to use, and you know, the mission of the Lake Association is to promote the betterment of the lake for not just our generation, but for future generations as we go forward. And you know, I know we can do that through the association and with the support of all you. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Steve McComish to talk a little bit about AIS for you. Oh, and by the way, just hold your questions to the end of the meeting. Thanks.
Thank you, Jerry. Good evening, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here again tonight. My name is Steve McComas. I have a little company called Blue Water Science, and I've been able to work on Forest Lake for the last several years, and I brought some information on the aquatic invasive species and the surveys that we've been doing and some of the management that we've been doing and some of the results. So, start out with, we're going to be looking at curlyleaf pondweed, Eurasian milfoil, flowering rush, and zebra mussels. They're all aquatic invasive species. They kind of add to the overall ecosystem, sometimes in not the most beneficial and helpful ways, though. But in some cases, you know, every invasive species does have a weak point or an Achilles heel, and we have found some ways to kind of manage some of the extra heavy growth, especially of some of these aquatic plants. And one of those aquatic plants is curlyleaf pondweed. And what we do is we go out early in the year and we survey for curlyleaf pondweed and look to see where it might be growing now in April here. In fact, we'll be out next week on Forest Lake. At this point, curlyleaf only has a few stems scattered here and there, and we predict where it might be a heavy growth in another month based on those stem densities. So if we get 5 or 6 stems on a rake head, that's going to be a real heavy growth in another month, and we'll circle that area up to be treated. But if we pull up a rake and there's only 1 stem on there, for example, that's probably only going to produce a light growth in another month, and we'll bypass that and not really circle that up for treatment. So last year in 2018, late ice out, so we were out on May 8th, we only delineated about 16 or 17 acres of curlyleaf to treat. And when we first went out there, we came back with that number, and a few folks said, "Are you sure?" Because the year before, in 2017, we treated 160 acres. They said, "Why don't you go back out and recheck?" So I did. I went back out the next week, and no, it came back about that level. And sure enough, when we treated curlyleaf pondweed in those 16 acres, when we went back and checked again in another month, sure enough, curlyleaf was just way down last year, and the areas that we treated were pretty successfully controlled. So that was good news from the standpoint that curlyleaf was way down. Sometimes these climatic factors are a huge impact. Late ice out, cold, cloudy days, and a lot of snow cover. So we'll see what happens this year. We'll know more next week. But what we have found over the years, say in the last 5 or 6 years, we've gone over and looked at what would be calling hot spots. These are the areas that have been treated in the last 6 years. And you can see that, especially down in Third Lake, there's been some real hot spots. And last year, in 2018, those are the areas that were treated as well. Not much treatment was necessary. Although we had some curlyleaf growth, not much treatment was needed up there. But in the past, we have had this type of a curlyleaf, heavy growth condition. So we'll see what happens again in another week. I am kind of predicting that with that snowpack we had in February, it really seemed to put kind of a damper on some of the curlyleaf growth. I've only been out on a couple of shallow lakes so far this year, but curlyleaf seems to be just hindered a little bit. Well, the other AIS or plant that we've been looking at, submerged plant, is Eurasian watermilfoil. And it first came into Forest Lake in 2015, and it has spread, but so far it's been confined for the most part up in the first lake. We have not found, all these little black dots are our sample sites. We have not found Eurasian watermilfoil in second or third lake at this point. It's been up in First Lake, and the Forest Lake Lake Association has been fairly aggressive along in combination with the Watershed District to really go out and treat these areas and try to nip it in the bud. And to this point, we're probably not ever going to eradicate Eurasian milfoil, but it looks like we might be able to slow its spread in the second and third lakes. And that was certainly the case last year. In fact, that's the way it's been for the last few years. We look at 2015, 16, 17, and 18, we can see that these are the areas that have been treated for Eurasian water milfoil up to this point, and there are some areas that kind of are showing up again. These are kind of the hot spots right now for Eurasian milfoil, and the good news is that we're not seeing it in second and third lake. However, the trend usually is that it will typically likely spread to second and third lakes. We're going to try to keep it contained in first lake for as long as we can at this point. So last year I think we treated about 40 acres, and this year we'll be out and looking to see where it is and try to hit it again. And it's been a fairly aggressive program, and so far has successfully contained it in that first lake. Flowering rush has been in Forest Lake for a good 20 years, maybe even more. And you can see that when we first started another aggressive herbicide program for controlling flowering rush, this was 2014. Since then, we've been going out. These are the initial surveys where it's found, the acres that's been found. And when we get done after treatments, you can see that every year, or at least the last few years, those initial constant or areas have been diminished, and when we get done, we're down just to really small little patches. When we first started back in 2014, there were some pretty significant beds of flowering rush, and after this program, and as we survey and do our last assessment, so far every year since then, we've been down to pretty much just small little patches where you get a few stems of flowering rush hitting or emerging through the surface. And last year in 2018, whoopsie, I'll just go back here. In 2018, this pretty much flowering rush is in second and third lakes, and probably third lake is where it's been the heaviest. And that's been the trend for the last 5 years. And we had 12 treatment areas that were treated, and we came back to assess that. The treatment was on July 13th, so we wanted to come back and check on July 25th, about 10, 12 days later. These green dots now represent areas where flowering rush was found, but at light growth. And those dots are really not, they're not to scale, because here's a green dot right here. We have about 10 or 15 stems coming up, but that gets a dot. And that has been kind of after a good, solid herbicide treatment, that's kind of what we're left with. In fact, then what we do is we come back and treat it again. And in this case, we did it August 21st. We did that second treatment. And then we came back and looked at the existing condition in September, about a month after that treatment. And although we had some green dots in areas that weren't treated, it had kind of resprouted in some new areas. But again, these patches are 10, 12 stems, and rarely are we finding any continuous beds of flowering rush. So ecologically and recreationally, it's not really much of a problem based on this herbicide and this management approach for flowering rush. Well, as we know, zebra mussels are in Forest Lake. They were first observed in 2015. They're pretty much, here's where we first found them. At one point, the idea was, or the question always is, if we got there, could we eradicate zebra mussels and be done with them? Well, it turns out that we did our kind of rapid response plan for zebra mussels, and what we found is that when we did our survey around the lake, we found them at actually 4 or 5 sites. Once you get past one site with zebra mussels as they're colonized, once you get past one site, it means that they're pretty well distributed, and eradication is not a good strategy or objective, but rather now you're looking at, well, what's going to happen in the long term? What kind of controls are there, if any? And we'll be kind of tracking zebra mussels once they're in a lake like Forest Lake. So that's where we are right now. They are going to continue to expand a bit. You can see that here's some plate samplers that were put out by I believe it was the Watershed District, and then kind of checked. And in the last few years, yes, the numbers of zebra mussels have have been increasing, and they probably are going to at some point peak. And that is their numbers they'll reach an abundance where they actually filter enough algae down that they'll start starving themselves because they're running out of food. Algae is their main food source. They're such good filters, they'll take all the edible algae out of the lake, or take it down so far, it can't sustain that population, and the zebra mussels will start dying back. And that might be happening to a degree. This right here, here's a transparency table for the west, middle, and east basin. The further down you are on this graph, the better the water clarity. So zebra mussels came in, we had some improving water clarity, and last year in 2018, actually clarity has decreased a little bit in all three basins. It might be due to a point that the zebra mussels now have already maybe peaked. They've been in the lake for about 3 or 4 years, maybe longer, and if they've either stabilized the population or they're actually starting to die back, and if their filtering mode then decreases, their filtering efficiency or filtering volume, then the algae are going to be, won't be as low, and algae are really, what we're measuring the water, when we measure clarity in Forest Lake, we're really measuring the amount of algae in the water. And the less algae you have, the clearer the water. So we'll see how this goes, but at some point we've seen in other lakes, the zebra mussel population kind of stabilizes, it has some ups and downs, it kind of tracks the algae, and clarity likewise will go up and down. Well, it's probably going to have some impact on, like Jerry mentioned, on the aquatic plants, because aquatic plants, being plants as like they are, the more sun you get, the more photosynthesis and the more plant growth you'll get as well. We sampled the lake and did this grid sampling back in 2013. The green squares are light growth of native plants, and the yellow squares are moderate growth, and the red squares represent kind of heavy growth where the plants are almost to the surface. So we came back and did this again last summer in Forest Lake, and what we found is that the distribution has increased slightly, a few more points out, a little bit deeper water, but we did find out there are more reds. So what happens is that the abundance of the native plants is starting to increase because of the improved clarity. If we put these two maps together, you can see that here's First Lake. There were no reds in First Lake in 2013, and we have a few right here. Likewise in Second, we're getting a little bit of an increase in the abundance of plants. They're growing a little bit deeper, but not really that much deeper yet at this point. So we'll see what happens with the native aquatic plants, but with the clarity conditions and as they've improved, we probably will be looking at a little bit more heavier growth of these aquatic plants in the long term, actually. Well, one of the things that the aquatic plants do is not only are zebra mussels clearing up the water, but there are algae growing on all these leaf surfaces. Like this plant right here, for example, has attached algae to it. Well, the attached algae takes phosphorus out of the water column as well. And then when the phosphorus levels in the lake go down, algae, the open water algae numbers will go down as well. So we have not only zebra mussels working on the algae, but these attached algae on these plants taking out phosphorus will help improve the clarity too. So plants have a way of sustaining good clarity in the long run also. Here's what we would kind of predict based on just lake contours. As water clarity improves, the red areas would indicate areas where we might expect some heavy growth because that's shallower, and the yellow areas represent areas that we probably would expect moderate growth. Maybe not necessarily nuisance, but it could be, you'd certainly notice it. But you can see at the red areas, which is based on depth, this is where we kind of are predicting that some of the heavier native plant growth might occur into the future. Dominant plant right now is coontail in the lake, along with northern watermilfoil, northern watermilfoil being the native milfoil. Well, we're seeing some things in Forest Lake, but we do have, fortunately, some benchmarks and some other reference lakes, so to speak, and it's kind of following the pattern in Forest Lake that we have seen in some other lakes as well. So zebra mussels, you know, they have an exponential growth phase. They actually start to decline after 3 to 5 years, and that's kind of maybe what we're seeing in Forest Lake. And then after that, we kind of get into a long-term stable situation. So these cascade of changes are going to affect clarity and algae and plants. One of the good things is that we don't see a big change in fish, so to speak. We might see change in the habits of fish and where they might be, you know, living and things, but in terms of the biomass and numbers of fish, I think we're going to be okay. At least that's what we have seen in other lakes too, as well. Pounds of fish, pounds per acre, about the same. So in conclusion, Forest Lake is still a great lake. It has all these great natural resources and natural attributes. We have, you know, eagles, we have the waterfowl, water birds, and all the surrounding wilderness as well. So the lake is still healthy, even though we have some AIS. One of the biggest adverse impacts for AIS often is coming down, not so much the ecology. It certainly has an impact and causes changes, but a lot of it has to do with economics. We still want to be conscientious and careful to prevent new AIS from coming in as well. So with that, that's a little bit from last year. Anyway, I think that's all for me for right now, and I'll turn it over to Steve.
Well, good evening, everyone. This presentation is going to be on aquatic plant management, but also on the DNR permitting options that you all can use to control shoreline vegetation. And I'm not Rob Dobb. I'm Steve Schmaltz. I'm a member of the board. I'm also a member of the board manager for the Comfort Lake Forest Lake Watershed District. We invited Rob to speak last year at our meeting on this subject. Unfortunately, got sick and couldn't come out, but we didn't have any power, so we couldn't show the slides. We invited him back again this year, but his work schedule was such that he couldn't make it again. So rather than postponing it another time, I agreed to come up and try to go through these slides with the help of some consulting help from the Comfort Lake Forest Lake Watershed District. So with that, you may ask, why is this topic on the agenda? Well, there's 3 main reasons for that. The first is that aquatic plant management, or aquatic plants, vegetation, really aren't weeds that we can indiscriminately and completely try to remove from the lake. They really are important elements for the lake. There's 18 species in the lake of different plants, and we have probably one of the widest and most diverse vegetation in many of the Twin Cities lakes. So these actually plants now really contribute to the ecology of the lake and the health of the lake in a number of ways. First of all, they control the sediment on the bottom. They stabilize the shoreline. They will help clean the water. They provide very important habitat for fish, fish predators, amphibians, turtles, also birds and other animals. And they will also remove unwanted nutrients such as excess nitrogen and also phosphorus. So they're very critical to the health and the future of the lake. And if we try to remove these indiscriminately, what we're going to end up with is a lifeless, probably smelly, very large stormwater body. So it's not going to be very healthy at all. So it's very important that we maintain this balance. Now, having said that, I think we all know that vegetation can be a problem for recreation, getting in and out of your dock sometimes depending on where you are at the lake, and also trying to swim in beach areas. So what the DNR has done is they've tried to develop a permitting system which provides a balance between the needs of recreation for shoreline owners and also the need to preserve the ecology of the lake. And one last point why this is important is that, as mentioned before, that zebra mussels are in the lake, and we know that improves water clarity, and it's going to drive heavier growth of the various vegetation in the lake. So with that as background, why don't we start looking at some of the permitting options that are out there and how you can use them to address any issues you have on the lake. The rules and the permits actually change by by the type of plants that are out there. Emergent plants are like cattails, rushes, and so forth, reeds, wild rice, and they grow between the shoreline and partially into the water. As you can see here, we've got some rushes and bulrushes and cattails, and the permitting here is required for creating a 15-foot wide pathway through this vegetation so you can access in and out of the lake. And you'll see that on the left side here. There's a boat. This is a far away view, but there's a boat down there that's got an area where it can come in. Over here is a more typical situation where we've been able to clear vegetation around the dock so you can get in and out of that dock. Otherwise, it would be very difficult. The situation down here is actually from White Bear Lake, and this shows new growth in exposed lake beds. No dredging or any heavy equipment is allowed to disturb the bottom. So that same 15-foot corridor rule pertains here also. And finally, under emergent plants, if the permits are not provided or allowed just for cosmetic removal of vegetation. So unless you have a need for to get in and out of your shoreline, the vegetation really has to stay there by state law. So that was for emergent plants. Let's look at floating leaf plants, and for Forest Lake, the only floating leaf plant we have is the, I think the white lily pad. And here we have rules that are a little different again. First of all, no permit is required for maintaining a 15-foot wide area in and out of the lake. And you can see this here. It's going to be very hard, but over here you can see a channel that's been developed and one over here, which is a 15-foot corridor. So that's allowed without a permit. You also have an additional option for swimming to submit an application for a 50 by 50-foot area permit for mechanical clearing and also a chemical clearing for swimming. And this 2,500 square foot rule is dependent upon having only 50 feet along the shoreline or half your shoreline distance. So if you had a shoreline of 80 feet, half of that would be 40 feet. So you could clear an area 40 feet by 55 feet into the lake for swimming. The other point on floating vegetation, as you can see over here, we've got clear water around the dock. And over here, it's probably hard to see, but there's a little lily pad patch over there. You can't really apply for a permit to remove that. They're not going to grant it because it's for aesthetic reasons again. So that's mainly for floating plants. The last group would be submerged vegetation, and this is probably the largest group. It consists of Eurasian watermilfoil, curlleaf pondweed, wild celery, Canadian waterweed, which is a popular plant in our lake. So all those comprise the main submersive plants, and they're very important. Got to go one more. Okay, they're important because they stabilize the sediment and they also stabilize the shoreline, which is very important in keeping the quality of the lake high. So here you have the same option for mechanical permits to control up to 2,500 square feet with the same rule we had before, that you can have either 50 by 50 or half your shoreline as long as it's, and out 50 feet as long as it's less than 2,500 square feet. The other requirement is for using chemical herbicides. A permit is always required for any type of herbicide control on the vegetation. Now, you sometimes have to have a contractor apply it because of certain types of chemicals, which the two most common ones are diquat and liquid hydrothol, have to be applied by a contractor. If you're doing it yourself, two common chemicals that can be used without a contractor's license would be aquicide pellets and also hydrothol 191 granules. So if you have more serious work to be done and have to use a different type of chemical, you may have to hire a contractor for that. And finally, at the top, any type of mechanical equipment to be used to control submerged vegetation has to be also applied for by a permit and approved by the DNR. The next section really pertains to something we're all very familiar with: algae, duckweed, and swimmer's itch. Now, the regulations here pertain to skimming off and removing the algae and duckweed, and you do not need a permit to do that. And for swimmer's itch, you do need a permit, but you do not have to have an inspection. So those are the rules there. And this last situation is where you have a tremendous amount of algae covering the entire lake. It requires 50% of the homeowners to agree for some kind of treatment, and we don't have that situation in Forest Lake. Finally, some specialty situations. With all the high water we have this year, there could be a good chance we're going to have more bogs floating around. And the rules here require a permit to either control or remove a bog. And if you're going to move it, you should put it above or deposit above the ordinary high water level, or you should stake it to the ground where it previously had come loose. Channels, again, follow the normal rules of 15 foot wide, and then in terms of maintaining the navigability of the channel. And then the last one would be down here using what they call hydro devices, hydrojets. And that can only be used for loose debris. It cannot be used if it disturbs the aquatic roots or it disturbs the bottom. So again, a permit would be required for that. And our last point here is on offshore, and I wanted to use this situation to kind of differentiate between the two types of permits you can get. We've been talking about aquatic plant management, APM, permits, and these can be used for both native plants as well as for invasive plants. So you can use it either way, and they're used primarily for consumers and used primarily for waters that are only 150 feet from shore, which is called the riparian shoreline. So those permits can be used. If you treat water outside the 150 area, it requires a different permit called an invasive APM permit, and it's used primarily for large treatment of invasive species, like we do for curly-leaf pondweed, Eurasian watermilfoil, et cetera. So there, the permit is only allowed one permit per lake per invasive species. So it's like the city would obtain a permit, or the lake association, or some group would probably be sponsoring that type of permit. And they could only be used in areas outside the 150-foot line, which would be called public waters. So those are the two types of permits. You all would be working primarily with APM permits, which can do either invasive or natural native plants. So that pretty much covers it. So next we have, I think, Mike Kinney, who will be speaking on the watershed. Mike?
Thank you, Steve. Again, I'm Mike Kinney. I'm the district administrator for the Comfort Lake Forest Lake Watershed District. We are a small local government unit and funded both through taxes and with a lot of grant funds from various sources. I will note that one of the things that we did have in the packet is a summary of those plant permitting activities for your reference. I will also like to introduce Garrett Miller. He's our new technician. He's going to be our new Lake Association outreach person, as well as Jessica Lindemeyer. She helped put together a lot of the materials. We do have a table in the entryway of materials and for people to pick up if you have any questions. So, yeah. See if we got that. All right, just wanted to go through a few of our programs. One of them I'm going to talk about is the boat inspections in detail, but so we do permitting for construction or land disturbing activities. So we deal with the erosion settlement control issues around the city. There's a lot of construction activities over the last couple of years. We've been issuing over 40 permits, and some of those permits include dozens or maybe even a couple hundred homes. So there's a lot of activity within the district here recently. Water monitoring, we do that, a lot of diagnostic work and ongoing monitoring throughout the district. And also some different research. We've been able to leverage a lot of local universities, St. Croix Watershed Research Station, doing some really advanced research on some of our lakes, and then also in the AIS and aquatic invasive species area. So I want to touch on the watercraft inspection program here a little bit, since we've already covered the AIS pretty well. And so we have funded, along with a variety of partners, an ever-increasing number of inspections, and this gives you a little summary of those inspections just from 2014. The district actually had started a few years prior as a partnership with Chisago County on some of the lakes, including Forest Lake, within the district. And as you can see down in the lower point here, so we've been tracking, we collect a lot of data. It's been the same information year after year, consistent with the DNR's data, and trying to look at, one thing that, for example, is this item on where the lakes have come from. And so spiny water flea, that's another invasive species within Minnesota that we do not want to have in any of our lakes. But we did, so while we're not at the boat launches, the 3 on Forest Lake every hour, we do try to focus the majority of our inspector time on the Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, because we know from history that's when it's the busiest. And also I'll note that Forest Lake is compared to the other lakes that have inspections throughout Washington County, or even the region with Chisago County, it is by far the busiest lake of that region. So, but we do then collect information about spiny water fleas and starry stormwater and other things, but it's really important then, and of course the main thing that we do there is education with the people coming in and out of our lakes. So our goal for this year is 2,700 inspection hours, and again we try to prioritize holidays and weekends, and a total funds and where they're from. We get funds from a grant through Washington County. This is really funds from the state of Minnesota funneled through Washington County, and then also with the City of Forest Lake, the Lake Association, and of course the Watershed District itself. I want to touch on a few projects here more recently that are closely connected to Forest Lake, and also just looking at our overall water quality goals and trends. And so while not making huge leaps here, and while our long-term goal for the district is 30 micrograms per liter, and I know that doesn't really mean much, but it is a little bit of a clarity piece in trying to get to this mesotrophic range. And what it would amount to is that if you're at the end of your dock at about 5 to 6 feet of water, so you would be able to see the bottom of the lake at any time through the entire summer season, which presently you're not able to do so. So we've been focusing then on a approach of diagnostic monitoring where we go through and starting upstream and then working downstream. All these circles are projects that we have completed in the last 4 years or less, and with the intent to try to improve the water clarity in all of our lakes in the region. So looking at Forest Lake itself, then what we've done is that there are roughly 30, I would say, main little drainage areas into Forest Lake. And so we went to all those, about 15 of the highest flows. We talked to the Lake Association members, the cities, and then we just drove around and we looked at each one of them. And we did a year's worth of monitoring at each site to try to see which areas were contributing the most. And so while this slide is busy and doesn't mean much to you, perhaps, it does tell us a lot of information about where we want to focus our efforts. Because our goal is try to find those projects that have the highest return on investment of our local property tax dollars and tax dollars in general, because we do get clean water funds from the state. So right now, this Castlewood Golf Course area, it's not the golf course, but it's a drainage area. It's actually the ag field to the south that's really the contributor. We actually have a project in place for this year to take care of that. And now we're looking at Hayward Avenue, and what we're calling the JD6 is the area south of the East Basin over there, roughly right in that location. And again, so we're trying to focus our efforts and our limited funds on those things that provide us the best return. Because we can find projects all over the place, and we've had people approach us about doing projects on their property, et cetera. But for many of them, they just don't pass the mustard, so to speak, with respect to the cost-benefit analysis that we like to try to do. And so as we look at the long-term goals for Forest Lake, we're trying to reduce roughly 1,000 pounds of phosphorus going into the lake for long-term water quality improvements. So on the left is what we've completed, or completely completed, and the center one is actually projects that we have currently that are completed and ongoing or under construction, and I'll get into those a little bit. And now with a JD6 drainage area, Third Lake, and Hayward Avenue, et cetera, we're looking to try to find the next set of projects to get us to the long-term goal. So we did this stormwater project. It was actually a city stormwater pond that we partnered with them on. We took the lead, and to do this one, it was probably the first project we did directly on the lake. And so that had a life cycle cost of $613. Then we did this other one on Third Lake on the East Basin side in this project, and that one came in at $145 a pound for a life cycle cost. So we are seeing improvements in these areas, but still more to go. Now our big one, and I wanted to maybe focus on this a little bit. So again, there's some agricultural fields on the west side of the road that happen to be going through the Forest Hill Golf Club property. And so when we were able to confirm that the runoff coming through that property was really at such an elevated level, we looked at what could we possibly do there, and they happen to have this piece of property over here behind the driving range that was really out of the way in a corner where that channel came through that they were not using. So what we proposed and they agreed to was a stormwater reuse project where, so we've constructed this large pond, and as noted, we have a grant for over $800,000 to do this, but we're going to capture the majority of the sediment and the nutrients coming in off of all that land, several hundred acres to the west that are going into Shields Lake, and that'll capture the majority of the nutrients and pollution going into Shields Lake and settle in that pond. And then we have a gravity flow system through those, in that yellow pipe area, that drainage, to the lower ponds right here. And so they've currently been taking water out of the deep aquifer, roughly 500 to 600 feet. The water that we use for drinking water. They were grandfathered in because they drilled it back in the 50s. So it's about a 12-inch well, and they're using a lot of our precious groundwater. That was another reason it scored well on the grant. We're going to offset, on average, 26 million gallons of groundwater usage for this project. So really a fantastic partnership with the golf club there. And when we get done with this project, actually is completed last November, so it'll be stabilized here this spring. We've got it all covered and seeded. It'll come back in, and they'll put that system online. And then we'll go into Shields Lake, or we're going to do an alum treatment on that, because overall, Shields Lake has been contributing several hundred pounds of phosphorus to Forest Lake. And so this combination of projects here, we will reduce 250 pounds of phosphorus a year into Forest Lake. So it won't be just the zebra mussels that are going to be cleaning up Forest Lake. It'll also be projects like this for the long term. So, and you can see then the life cycle cost in this now is under $100 a pound. And by comparison, most watershed districts in the Twin Cities, people tell me they can't possibly find or do a project under $2,000 a pound. So I think we're doing pretty well. Maybe the last item I'll just touch base on here is our enhanced street sweeping. So I've had some experience previously with this sort of effort in another city and with the University of Minnesota, some research where we had found that there's a lot of material that's on these streets, and I refer to it as car dandruff that gets dragged all over the place, and then it goes into the storm sewers, and storm drains. So those drains then go into either a stormwater pond or directly into the lake. And in Forest Lake, we have a lot of direct drainage. So we did a study, an analysis really, of how much then we could capture going into Forest Lake. And then with that study, we applied for a grant, and the city was then basically given the full cost. The Rice Creek and ourselves contributed the balance of the cost for the city to purchase a regenerative sweeper. So it's no cost to the city. They were able to take their money that they were using to contract it to pay for staff time then. So you're going to see this sweeper out there with this kind of logo and information on it around Forest Lake here, probably this week or next week even. So we're really pleased with that and also just the results that we are expecting out of it. So again, trying to focus on this cost effectiveness standpoint and why it's so important to the Watershed District Board and to the staff. We know that by doing this analysis, that this just locally, if we were not more as focused, the difference of trying to get to our overall goals for the district could be as much as $41 million. And so we know that we can be more targeted, and that's our goal with all of our projects. I do want to bring to your attention also that we do have our first ever State of the Watershed public meeting next Tuesday. It's going to be actually at the Forest Hills Golf Club, the new Mulligan's restaurant there, if you're familiar with that. It'll start, there'll be like a reception or so at 5:30 mingling, but then our programs will start at 6 o'clock, and then again we'll have some time for question and answers later in the evening. So, also we are planning our planning for the next 10-year of watershed management, and so we are having a kickoff event, Arts in the Park, on Tuesday, June 18th, and we hope that if you see our table there, you'll stop by and chat with us and give us your input. Okay, thank you.
Well, thank you for all the speakers. Could we have the lights up in the room here now, maybe? We'll probably get into our question session. Do we have another microphone, too, by chance, that we can pass around to individuals if they got a question? That'd be great. And we may have our speakers need to come up and answer some questions. So I guess if you got a question, raise your hand, and we'll pass you the mic. Maybe we can have one of our board members kind of walk the mic around.
Loud if that works too.
Okay, that's fine.
My question is on the inspectors, because it seems like we're dealing with a lot of boats coming off lake, on lake, that are bringing in challenges for us. And so are the inspections truly effective? And if so, who does them? Can you be trained? And can they do more, almost like a neighborhood watch?
We'll let Mike answer that.
Yes, good question. So we do believe, we know based on, again, tracking information, the number of boats that come in with violations has dropped substantially from maybe where it was 5-6 years ago. The last couple of years have been kind of a plateau, like I think 1 or 2%. But still, that's enough to cause a problem, of course. You know, you only need one boat coming in from one of those lakes that we don't want, and that's a new infestation. And of course, we also then check on the way out to make sure boaters are not taking problems to another lake. So the inspections do work, but again, our coverage is, you know, we try to focus it on the weekends when we anticipate boaters coming from larger distances, but we're really surprised. We see boats that come from northern Minnesota 6 or 7 hours away down to lakes in our district here from one day to the next. I mean, people travel great distances to fish and to recreate. So we know that. So there are some other programs. All of our inspectors are trained by the DNR, and presently they're paid. There is a volunteer program as well through the DNR that's available, and if you want to, anybody wants to connect with us, we can get it to the Lake Association or be available afterwards to give you the information, or at least give you our contact information and you can connect with us. But that'd be great if we could have more hours. And we do it all online, scheduling for like when we know there's going to be inspectors, so we could probably figure that out.
Yeah, if you're interested in that, just send me an email, and then I'll get you in touch with Mike in the Watershed District, and you can get more information that way. Yes?
Is this, yeah, this is working. Yeah, follow up on that boat inspection. Now, I live on the lake, and, you know, I'm in and out, you know, once in the, you know, spring and then take it out in the fall. I've never been inspected on the way in. It seems like it's always on the way out. So how are you keeping track of what's coming into the lake if you're not inspecting the boats that are coming in?
Well, I'm probably similar to you. If depending upon the time that you put your boat into the lake, again, as Mike said here, we probably have 40% of the time of inspectors.
Right, but we won't start until opener.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you're saying they inspect them on the way in. I mean, that's where they should be inspecting.
Correct.
Not, you know,
But the reason what I was trying to say is that perhaps the reason why you weren't inspected going in is because the inspectors weren't there, because we don't have 100% time inspection. We don't have the funds to do that. That's one of the dilemmas.
all right, thank you.
Yeah.
But I also know that we've communicated with different entities, people that do commercially bring boats in and out for people, and to work with them and making sure that they're checking the boats as they're taking them out, because we know that people are putting boats in already, but we won't have inspectors out there until the opener weekend. So.
Hi, I live off of the channel on Third Lake, so I know it's not represented a lot on maps, or you don't kind of see anything related to that, but there is about 25 homes back there, and I was hoping there was someone we could get in contact with to clean it up a little bit. So I just didn't know who our go-to person would be for that. I know some of the other channels get, you know, harvested and things like that, and so we've been kind of doing some research on the back end as a group. And again, I've never been approached by the Lake Association prior to moving in there, and there's 25 of us back there, so it might be kind of a good resource to tap into.
Absolutely. Are you talking right there by the public launch, that channel that
Yep.
goes in the back there? Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I just
you're
add
right.
to that really quick?
Sure.
I'm her neighbor. So we've been told that the water back there used to be crystal clear, beautiful, swimming, beautiful channel. There's an island and houses built out on this island, and there's a road that they put to connect it, and apparently there wasn't a culvert put in, so the water isn't able to drain. So we've heard some of the theory of why it's so mucky, but it's pretty bad. My husband fell in last year and was head to toe some sort of reaction to the water. It was almost like a poison ivy. The doctor couldn't figure it out, so it was pretty intense.
Okay. Why don't you reach out to me, send me an email, and maybe we'll try to get together with the Watershed District here to look at that a little bit more. I mean, I know where you're talking about, and a lot of people don't even know you're back there, to be honest with you. Yeah, a lot of people come back and fish, but right, you have to know it's back there to find it, right, but yeah.
I'd like to know how we get rid of the geese and all the pollution they're putting in the lake.
Okay, if you're ready for this, so it has been well established that if you have a really good buffer, geese are very scared that some predator is going to be in some plants or grass. So if you have about 10 to 15 feet of fairly tall plants, preferably native, and I'll give a little boost here for our plant grant program, we will offer up to $500 on a reimbursement basis after you have installed the plants near your shoreline. So we don't do a big landscaping project, but we will offer some reimbursement. But you can look it up. Geese are really, truly afraid of taller plants. They will not enter your lawn and cause problems if you have a nice buffer. So there's your solution.
Yeah. Sure, go ahead.
When I put my pontoon in last year, there was an inspector at the third lake, and he said you can't put it in because you got a lot of zebra mussels on the back. So he sent me over to the first lake to have them flushed off, which was great. But the problem is, how do we know where they're going to be? Do you have any kind of a public announcement? Do they tell us when they're coming out and where they're going to be? They spread to get the zebra mussels off our pontoons or boats.
Yeah, I mean, you were sent over to First Lake there because there was a high-pressure hot water pressure washer to clean it off. Unfortunately, that pressure washer is through the DNR and or in some cases also through Chisago County, okay? We don't have 100% coverage of that high-pressure hot water washer every hour that we have boat inspectors out there. So unfortunately, we know when it's going to be there, but we could send out, I suppose, an email to people letting them know that, but it's not 100% of the time because, again, of cost. Yeah.
So I live in Second Lake, and over the years, and I've been on the lake on and off since the 60s, and I think the weeds have gone out deeper by a factor of 3 or 4, but I didn't hear anything talking about increasing the number of acres that they're going to spray to try to eliminate some of the weeds.
Are you talking native vegetation or?
Native or
Yeah.
invasive, either one. And I guess I don't understand that, seeing as it's grown by 4 or more factor. Why aren't we removing more of it so that it's still a recreatable lake? I mean, it's become almost unrecreatable since the last 10 years have been the worst I've ever seen since I've been here in the 60s. And that goes back to when we had no sewer and it was septic.
So that's not an uncommon question. And Steve Schmalz did go over the limits on that. So.
Yeah, and he showed a graphic where it was going out, and it's expected to go out even further. I think the red rings around the lake made about, 1/3 of the lake recreatable between the 3 lakes?
Well, I think the graphs are showing, or the projection of, it's just based on the actual elevation of the lake. We're anticipating with clearer water, we would anticipate more plant growth. So 2 things. One is that being a little bit of a history buff and a member of a historical society, I have noted that there are a number of old photos of Forest Lake, 100+ years ago, where there was a lot of vegetation in the background at the shoreline. So naturally, Forest Lake probably had a substantially greater amount of vegetation here 100 years ago or so. So as the water clarity increases, those plants will continue to filter and provide habitat and other. So while it will, again, the DNR does allow some removal treatment, et cetera, to try to provide a balance. But long-term, from a water quality, I mean, it's really a trade-off. There's not one or the other. You either have a lake with more plants and clearer water, or you have a lake with fewer plants and then murky or turbid water. So those, they're often correlated, maybe not exactly year to year, but over a long-term period, that's what we would anticipate seeing.
I don't really see any evidence saying, I mean, from when I was a kid to now, I don't see it as being any clearer today than when it was back then, but that's my personal observation. I've lived here my whole life almost, so.
Yeah, I guess let me just touch on that a little bit more. To do a whole lake herbicide treatment to kill off native vegetation, DNR would never allow that. Yeah.
By the amount that it's going out.
Yeah, I mean, the cost of doing an entire shoreline area of native vegetation control is hundreds of thousands of dollars. And part of the dilemma is who pays for that? How does that get funded too, you know? What we're trying to do is encourage homeowners to do this APM, I think is what it's called, Steve talked about, to take care of the native vegetation in front of your dock out 150 feet. You know, you have that right to do that. But to do a whole lake type treatment would be extremely difficult to do. We don't do any herbicide treatment of native vegetation. We do AIS treatment with herbicide. We don't do.
So I'm not sure, are you suggesting that the distance that can be treated? The regulations are set by the DNR, we're just providing the information. They have the permits and they have the staff. So in terms of, I mean, presently, the limit is a 15-foot path, or getting an additional permit for 2,500 square feet as described in the handoff in the photos. But so, I mean, you can always petition the DNR to change those rules if that was of interest.
Yeah, Mayor.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think maybe just to echo those comments, I live 2 lots down from where the creek runs in from Shields Lake there, just to the east. In that south, I'm going to call it the southeast corner of Second Lake, the amount of weeds that have grown in and out, I'd say, probably 200-300 yards, makes it almost impossible at times to use the lake. And you talked a little bit about some of the things you're doing with Shields Lake, and of course that runoff from the golf course or wherever else runs directly from there into the lake. And I think we're seeing a tremendous amount of bloom, whether it's invasive species or native. It's becoming almost unmanageable and unusable shoreline in that corner. And the frustrating thing from a homeowner is that when you look at the areas around the lake that you're treating, seem to be very minimal amount of vegetation, if you want to call it that, compared to, I'd say, the 20 or 30 of us in that southeast corner of Second near the creek, where there's little to no treatment as marked by, I think, the markers that you put out in the bags. So first question is there anything more we can do about the amount of vegetation that's taking place down in that corner? Because quite frankly, it's almost impossible to get your boats in and out. It would come mid-July through the end of the summer. And 2, what can we expect to see from a water quality standpoint this year, if anything, based on the work that's being done in the basin on the south side of Forest Hills Golf Course?
I'll let Mike touch on the Shields project. And I mean, I know exactly what you're talking about there on Second Lake, and you're right. A lot of that, I believe, is contributable to what has been flowing in from Shields for a number of years there from a phosphorus standpoint into that corner of Second Lake. So we're hoping, I think, that, once Shields starts to be cleaned up, that we're going to start reducing that amount of phosphorus that's coming into that corner of the lake. Relative to the white markers you saw out there that we're marking, again, those markers that you're seeing out there is not for native vegetation herbicide treatment. That is for treatment of aquatic invasive species. We do no treatment on the lake anywhere for native vegetation. Now, not to say we can't consider that, but there's many, many restrictions on what we can do from a native vegetation standpoint according to DNR. But I believe, I'll let Mike talk about this, that once Shields, gets completed, I think you'll see a reduction, not to say you're going to eliminate those native vegetation there, but if you're feeding, your native vegetation phosphorus, is just going to keep growing and growing and growing.
Can't we get more cutting over that area to allow us to get our boats out into the lake, or?
Yeah, we'll look at that here. I know that was a problem area last year, and one of the things I want to do before we submit our permit to DNR for the weed harvester, we'll look at that area over there and try to expand the area that we can get a permit for from a harvesting standpoint.
Don't even put jet skis out anymore
Yeah.
because they can't get out to the
No,
middle of the lake.
I know exactly where you are, so.
You can cut a 50-foot path 150 feet out. That you should have public water, and then, if there's an issue, it might be something we can do on that.
Right, yeah, the harvester can make a path, but,
Yeah,
right.
We're clearing there, that's what I'm talking about. The first 150 feet of the shore of home is responsible. And through a permit, in fact, you don't even need a permit unless you've got this in order.
Yeah, I'd like to talk a little bit more, maybe offline, about
Yeah, we'll talk
what we
more.
can do from a
Yeah.
group of homeowners to address some of that.
And this is why I brought up earlier, folks, is that we're going to continue to see an increased native vegetation growth in the lake. And it's just a function of what's happening in the change of the lake. And some areas are going to be worse than others, but unfortunately, it's going to be where we're at now. So we need to do what we can try to do, but we still have some restrictions.
Just one other question. I was reading ahead in the materials, and probably for everybody. So if I read correctly, for us and homeowners to do a treated area around the shoreline, we only need the signatures of our neighbors. We don't need to go through the DNR. Is that correct?
Steve, you want
In
to
reading
touch on that?
in the brochure?
You're talking about herbicide treatment, right? So you need a permit to use the herbicide, but you can do it yourself if it's a certain chemical, those two chemicals that I mentioned. If it requires a chemical to kill a different type of plant, that's the two I mentioned, the diquat and
The aquacide.
yeah. Then you'd have to hire a contractor to do it. So you always need a permit if you're going to be using any type of an herbicide. And it may require a visit, may not require a visit. It's up to the DNR whether they come out. Once you've done it the first time, and if you're doing the same area year after year, they probably won't come out because they're just too busy. But does that answer your question? Yeah. Well, and we can chat offline a little bit if you like also. Yeah.
Okay, other questions?
That's all I can talk about. Who maintains the neighborhood boat ramps, that we get it off the lake? We live on First Lake, but on the southwest corner of Second Lake, there's a Land Beach Drive, there's a neighborhood boat launch, and it's just in terrible shape.
Yeah. I think you're talking the kind of, they're dead-end streets that kind of go right to the lake. Yeah. Those are city properties. So the maintenance of them is the responsibility of the city, or what's happening on that property is the responsibility of the city, I believe. Nope. Okay, I was wrong.
No, they're so much of Forest Lake was platted well over 100 years ago. And so at that time, it was very common. Europeans, still to this day, a lot of the shoreline is just considered public access. So that's what they brought with them, and that's what they platted. So those dead-end streets, so while they're owned by the city as access points, they are not legal boat launch sites. So technically, nobody is supposed to be using those for boat launch sites. So if you call the city and ask them to maintain it as a boat launch site, they might work up a little bit because that's not their intended use. They are intended for access, but for like you can bring in a canoe or something like that, or going in for snowmobiles and things like that. But according to the DNR, boats are only supposed to be launched at the public accesses.
So how many public accesses are there? No, she's talking about the one on Lake 2. That's the one she's talking about, Lake 2.
No, I think she's talking not by Aqua there, right? You're not talking about the, no.
Yeah, Aqua Beach, isn't that?
Beach, yeah.
No, there's only 3 public boat launches on Forest Lake, plus Tim's Marina.
So then why is there even signage down there that tells you no aquatic species and all this other stuff? It's got signage.
Yes, I happen to know that. Those are from the old WMO days. And we should probably, I mean, so while it still applies, even if you're carrying in a paddleboard or a canoe or anything, you know, they don't want you to drag something in there. I mean, technically, again, they're the cities. The city has just not spent the money to put up signs that say no launching of watercraft with motors, I suppose, would be the correct tactical way for them to have done it. But there are something, I think like 28 dead-end streets or accesses that the city owns around Forest Lake that people use just for either for foot traffic or otherwise. And it's just another long thing in their budget that they just have not addressed. We've talked about it. We worked with them to inventory them all, but yeah, that's kind of where they're at. It's just another thing. Those signs are relics from the Forest Lake WMO timeframe.
So maybe you want to just contact the city regarding maybe trying to get those signs and stuff down then, you know, taken removed.
Or updated, really.
Or updated, right.
Yeah, right down there.
I live on the south side of First Lake, kind of halfway between the channel and the bay. And I don't know anybody that lives in that area. I know you put more markers around the channel now, which is good, and that's it's more of a safety thing, I suppose. There's a real shallow area to the south and west of the channel, kind of between the shore. And in the summertime, it gets to be maybe 8-10 inches deep. And us sitting there on our deck, we see these people that aren't familiar with the lake, and they see that second lake, and they cut right through there. I was looking. And they see it coming, we know where it's going to happen, and there's nothing we can do about it. Is there any kind of signage possibly that can be put up?
You know, that's a good thought process. I mean, we talked about some of the funds from the Lake Association. You know, they make shallow water signs, but you need something to anchor that sign into it. It's so shallow there, you got no way of putting a sign there. You can't stick a post in the sand there either. But let us look at that, because I know exactly what you're talking about, and they cut right between the property and the rushes there. Yep, I understand.
And I bet you have that's what I see.
It's something, let us talk about that at the Lake Association, because we might be doing something with some buoys and stuff over there. So, okay, thank you.
But there's that rock over on the other side of the channel there, somebody hit that, and they put a buoy up, you know, so why can't you put just a couple of buoys?
Right. Yeah, we put the buoy up last year for that big rock out there in the middle, thanks to Bob Muskie, who GPS'd it for us.
Shallow buoys put out, one of them was almost right in front of my dock. I live just outside that shallow area. That they usually have them where it's worse coming in from the First Lake side because it's such a large area compressed down. Where you're coming from Second Lake, it's narrow, it's easy to spot in a large channel.
Right.
And I think part of it too is last year they had less buoys in the channel than they had in previous years. The buoys used to come out further in the First Lake.
Yeah, you know, those buoys are deployed by Washington County Sheriff, and the Lake Association tried to work with them last year. We did work with them last year, trying to place those things. One of the dilemmas we had is we wanted to get those buoys lit, and so we didn't have enough lights to put all the buoys that we had in years past, so we put less out there. But we also had significant damage. Many of those buoys between First and Second were destroyed last year, you know, and so we spent a bunch of money for nothing. So we're struggling trying to figure out what to do with that channel long-term from a safety standpoint. And that's why I mentioned earlier about a more robust lighted buoy that if a boat hits it, you know, it's going to know it hit it, but not to hurt the boat, but also not to completely destroy the buoy. And so it's a catch-22. That's a tough area, particularly at night when boaters come through there. So we're trying to figure out what to do with it in that area there. Other questions?
I just have a comment. My name is Kathy Bystrom, and I'm a member of the Forest Lake City Council, and I would encourage those of you who have issues or concerns with those dead-end streets heading into the lake, please shoot me an email with some specifics about your location and how we can get a hold of you, and I will get on top of that with our city administrator, and we'll see what we can do for you. So, or catch me at the end, and we can talk about your location as well.
Thanks, Kathy. Yes?
Has it changed the restrictions on how much they can harvest from the weed cutter? There used to be 2 weed cutters years ago that worked before. They took out the volumes and volumes.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. Years ago, there was 2 harvesters out there cutting all the time, and what was discovered was all we were doing was spreading AIS all over the lake. They were cutting curly pondweed, they were cutting everything else. And so the stuff was just spreading because of the cutting. And so also to...
Well, if they were cutting native species, they were cutting native species. That wasn't, that, I don't know how much it spread, but still, I know what some of the people were talking about, the runoff on the golf course has been tremendous. I mean, you can't put water skis to some of those places anymore. You can barely kayak to them. So it has increased tremendously over the that have lived on the lake a long time. Have noticed that.
Couple things. So the runoff is actually coming from the farm fields. It happens to go through the golf course. It's not the golf course. So I just want to provide that clarification. But also for the cutters as well. So whether it's the herbicide treatments that the Lake Association applies for, or we apply for, or the cutter that the city gets a permit for, we do help them get the permit. But the DNR has to review and approve every permit for every activity that any of our entities manage or do with respect to the lake. So from that standpoint, it is another element that I mean, 20 years ago, there were hardly any invasive species in the Twin Cities metro. There was a few with Eurasian Watermilfoil. The flowering rush was kind of unknown at the time, but now in more recent years, as it's become more prolific, they've clamped down on how much of the activity can occur because they have, the harvester collects between 70 to 80% of the plant, and the rest of it then is just free to float around. And some of the plants can easily take root or spread the seed or something. So that's why they review the application, they review the locations, and the harvester actually has a GPS unit located on it. So they track where the harvester goes, all that activity, and then it's recorded and sent in at the end of the season. So it's just a lot different. That's I guess.
Okay.
So the harvesting doesn't work. Why don't they control some of the regular vegetations? What do you call the native plants? Why don't you control some of those?
Yeah, I mean, the harvesters technically by DNR permit can only maintain navigable channels and areas. That's the purpose of what the DNR issues from a permit standpoint. We have to identify those areas on the lake from a navigation standpoint. Pardon me?
Nothing is navigable now.
Yeah, I mean, I understand what you're saying. I do. I mean, we do have regulations that we have to, abide to by the DNR, unfortunately. So, folks, it's 8:30. We're going to have to wrap it up. So I appreciate you coming. Thank you. All right, thanks everybody, and stop by out there if you want Rib Fest tickets. And thank you. Appreciate it.